tariffs make that very, very difficult. I think I understand the thinking behind it, but this sort of thing will start trade wars. The way to solve this now is to get a UK-US trade deal or some kind of deal where we negotiate intensively with the US and show that, we are allied countries. What's bad for us ends up being bad for them as well in the long term.
Welcome to today's Daily Tea. Don't worry, it's not a coup. We're just filling in for Camilla and Kamal, who are recovering from yesterday's spring statement.
Donald Trump has blown up Rachel Reeves' budget by announcing he's going to impose a 25% tariff on all car imports, which has sent the UK scrambling to negotiate a carve-out.
And that's not the only big news from DC. There's still the big fallout from Signalgate. And let me tell you, from having worked in government via WhatsApp or Signal is nothing new.
Kamal, meanwhile, is at a major leadership event in Cornwall, where he's been speaking to Kemi Badenoch about Trump's latest tariffs, and she has warned of a trade war. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor Dalek, kept saying during the budget that the world has changed. And within hours, the world changed yet again, threatening to wipe out her already tiny fiscal headroom. Late on Wednesday night, President Donald Trump announced new import taxes of 25% on cars and car parts coming into the US on what he is calling Liberation Day next Tuesday. The latest decision in Trump's tariff wars has wiped more than 13 billion euros off the value of European car makers. The president said the move would generate $100 billion of revenue for the United States. He has also warned that he could hit the EU and Canada with even larger tariffs if they both work together to, quote, do economic harm to the USA.
The row comes at a busy time for President Trump, whose administration is still dealing with the fallout of that Signal security leak, which saw a journalist accidentally added to a group chat discussing confidential plans to bomb Houthi targets in Yemen. The US is the UK's second largest car export market, and we're told the government is in frantic, extensive, behind-the-scenes conversations with the US, whilst being careful not to criticise the Trump administration publicly, to try and make British car manufacturers exempt from the tariffs ahead of a much-anticipated US-UK trade deal. A little Brexit benefit, if you will, Tim.
Finally, there had to be one.
With us to unpack all of this is our very special guest, Emily Jashinsky, DC correspondent for UnHerd. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Where to begin?
Well, Emily, I'd really like to ask, because we're trying to work out what's running through Trump's head. These tariffs, are they a negotiating strategy to force other countries to bend to America's will, or are they there for the long run? Does he really want to surround America with a tariff wall?
Well, I think he definitely intends for some of the tariffs to be a wall in the long run. I think the more extreme tariffs, the contrast between Canada and Mexico is a really good one, between Claudia Sheinbaum and now Mark Carney, but previously Justin Trudeau is a really good one in that the more obstinate Trump sort of sensed his counterpart was, the more willing he was to say, all right, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up, the tariffs are going up. So I think he is using some of the really extreme ones as a negotiating tactic, but he is absolutely, Trump's longest ideological commitment basically in his pre-political life is to protectionism. So I think he completely intends to have some measure of tariffs, probably higher than even when they were during the Biden administration, which continued the protectionism of the Trump's first administration. So I think he intends that to stay for the long term. That's something he's always been pretty committed to.
That's really interesting, because in this country there are some people, like the Liberal Democratic Party, if you've not heard of them, don't worry, they're irrelevant, who would like Britain to fight back against the tariffs, like they say Canada is doing. But from what you're saying, actually that's a mistake, that Canada is winding Trump up, and it might be better to play nice with him.
I couldn't think of a worse suggestion than telling the UK to pursue the Canadian route in the tariff war. And Canadian politicians are in a difficult spot because the Canadian people are offended, and not unreasonably so, by Donald Trump's continued flirtation with Canada becoming the 51st state, the tongue-in-cheek sort of mockery of Canada. Like, they actually have to stand up for their people and their sovereignty. So it does put Canadian politicians in a tough place. On the other hand, Claudia Sheinbaum down in Mexico has been willing to come to the table over and over again. She has not been publicly trying to kind of out-Trump Trump. Or trying to, get on his to make it look like she's going to war with him in the same way that Justin Trudeau did. And obviously Trump threw the first shot there in the trade war. There's no question about it. But to look like you're going after Trump, that you're taking him on as opposed to negotiating him, you're not going to end up, I think, getting the good end of that deal. However it plays out. I mean, the reason Trump gets away with that is because he knows America has the upper hand in just about any trade war, with maybe the exception of China.
Emily, in recent months, Donald Trump has become synonymous with another man, Elon Musk. Obviously, he owns Tesla, a big car-making company, who are in a bit of trouble at the moment already. Could he fall out with Elon Musk over this? Although I did notice that Musk was very quick to tweet out that Tesla will face significant difficulties from these tariffs. Is that him trying to show he's not being protected by Trump? Or is it him showing that there actually is a bit of a gap widening between the two men?
I think Trump has, especially in the wake of a story last week that was published saying Elon Musk had requested a briefing on China war plans, so on the potential United States war plans with China. When that story came out, the Trump administration freaked out, and Donald Trump himself said that would not be appropriate. So they said the story was untrue. I don't know whether or not it was untrue based on their reaction. It tells me that there may have been a kernel of truth to the story. But as soon as that happened, Donald Trump and Elon Musk have been trying to make a point that he is not, despite being a White House advisor, violating any conflicts of interest in his role at DOGE. Now, many ethics experts would disagree with that and say it's virtually impossible for Elon Musk to not be violating any of those conflicts of interest. We saw him hosting Narendra Modi not very long ago, and has been front and center with other leaders of state. So that's a pretty difficult line for them to continue to push. But I think it's more their reaction here is more them trying to say, look, of course there's no conflict. Elon is actually taking a hit from what's happening to Tesla. There's no oligarchy. He's not trying to enrich himself. So I feel like they see it as a way to kind of make that point.
Emily, I'd like to ask you about Signalgate. For those not following this, in short, some administration officials discussed an attack on Houthis in Yemen on the platform Signal. They accidentally included a journalist called Jeffrey Goldberg in this, and Goldberg, being a journalist, of course, then shared those messages, which is hugely embarrassing. Is this just a one-off mistake that will blow over, or is this going to be a real long-term headache for the administration?
This is going to be a long-term headache for the administration, I think, because Michael Waltz, who they are now intent on keeping, he is showing no signs of actually offering a resignation, or being fired by Donald Trump. So Musk and Trump had Lindsey Graham, very powerful senator when it comes to foreign affairs. They're all standing next to Michael Waltz, Trump's national security advisor.
That's the national security advisor. Sorry, thank you. You said it yourself. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. And Pete Hegseth, who also is alleged to have sent, sensitive information over that Signal group chat. Nobody looks like they're interested in removing them. And the reason that becomes a long-term problem is they've damaged their credibility internally. Particularly Michael Waltz has damaged his credibility internally. He's the man who created the Signal group. He's the man who now is suspicious to some people in Trump's orbit because they already saw him as a little bit too old right for the Trump administration. And now they believe he had Jeffrey Goldberg, a very hostile journalist's number in his cell phone. So if he doesn't resign, and the reason that the Trump administration is pretty hesitant to get rid of him is he's a rare figure that's familiar to the national security establishment, but also really well liked in Trump circles. That's a really hard type of person to replace. So they know they have something unique with Michael Waltz. Now, internally, his credibility is damaged and people are suspicious of him. So it's going to stick around for sure.
I'm really interested in how the administration is responding to this story because to my mind, they just accidentally added the wrong person to a group, and it happens, anyone listening, this will have happened to them, like they've been put on a mum and baby WhatsApp group or something from work. Only this was a national security signal group. I think the interesting element to me is how the president himself has got involved. He's called Goldberg a loser and a sleazebag, and we've got a little clip here that we'd like to play you of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had a run-in with a Sky journalist. Like, it feels like the administration and its allies have responded in such a bullish way. They've made this story bigger, and I just wonder if you could have a listen to this clip and help us understand why they're kind of almost feeding this, and instead of saying, do you know what, yeah, big mistake, how embarrassing, we accidentally added a journalist here, they've decided to go after Goldberg personally, and in fact I would say blow the whole thing up and create a conspiracy over something that is a cock-up.
This is Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman, talking to a Sky journalist.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary...
What country are you? Wait, what country are you from?
From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
Okay,
and you no. You should care about your own borders.
Do you care about American lives being put at risk?
Let me tell you something. Do you care about people from your country? What about all the women that are raped by migrants?
Do you care
No,
about
by migrants. No, do you care? Okay, you're done.
Do you care about American lives being put at risk?
You know what? I don't care. I don't.
Members fighting for your country.
I don't care about your fake news. Do you have a relevant question?
Yeah, I mean, the administration, especially yesterday, suddenly felt like it had the wind at its back because Jeffrey Goldberg ended up releasing a lot of the text messages, the signal messages that he initially said were too sensitive to publish. So that's when the Trump White House started to really lean into this. If you're on the press list, you got press releases of a tweet from Michael Waltz claiming like full victory over Jeffrey Goldberg yesterday. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was tweeting about it as well, or posting about it on X as well, basically claiming that this was always nothing and that it was the media who was making a big deal out of the story when there was really nothing to see there. So I think what they realized, and the reason they started to like cling to this story yesterday, is they thought this was their escape route of the Michael Waltz thing. They also got Steve Witkoff, who was on the message, to come out and say the Wall Street Journal never talked to him before they published this piece in their editorial section saying that it was reckless of him to be in Moscow and be on the Signal chat at the same time. He said they never reached out to him. He didn't have the phone with Signal on it in Moscow. So they sort of realized they could turn it into a media story. Or they could try to turn it into a media story and then maybe put out any fires on the right by rallying around Waltz. Now that the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, who wrote the story, some people may remember, that Donald Trump quipped that people at a cemetery were, quote, suckers and losers, a military cemetery when he was in Europe, his first administration. That story got under the skin of Trump world like few other stories ever have. So Jeffrey Goldberg's like an arch villain in Trump circles, and that's why it will continue to be a problem for Michael Waltz. But they really wanted to turn this into a media story as soon as he released those text messages because they see him as low-hanging fruit that helps them.
It feels like actually a kind of classic Trump playbook, doesn't it? Something that should be a negative story. He's actually doubled down on, is trying to say it's actually a media witch hunt because we added this guy to this group. But actually now, I mean, the trouble I would imagine that The Atlantic and Jeffrey Goldberg have is that he initially said some of these messages were too sensitive to release. And then a few days later, he has released them, which if you're in charge of HQ at The Atlantic, that's quite a welcome way to get to guarantee visitors to your website and get extra readers and so on. Like there's a potentially canny business model behind it. What I'm interested to know is, obviously there's always a delicate balance between politicians, journalists, national security figures on the Hill. How has this story sort of fed into those relationships and that quite delicate ecosystem?
Yeah, that is a really good question because Signal is used by everyone in DC. It's especially used by people on the right, as you guys have probably picked up on. So, I mean, originally people were sort of curious, like, are sources not going to talk to them over Signal anymore? Will people who have any sort of relationship to Trump world just have to stop using Signal? But interestingly enough, the Trump administration, including Tulsi Gabbard, who's she's the director of national intelligence, came out and started defending Signal. And in fact, many Trump administration officials have said that Signal comes preloaded on devices. CIA Director John Ratcliffe was defending use of Signal. So it seemed at first like this might be a really big deal. But now it seems like that's blowing over, and the Trump administration is saying, "Hey, Signal's totally fine. It's not Signal's fault. This is all just about Jeffrey Goldberg." And the point you raised about the Atlantic is a really good one. That's a tough thing for Jeffrey Goldberg to get around. I don't think it at all lets the Trump administration off the hook, but it certainly gave them a talking point, and it certainly made Jeffrey Goldberg look a bit foolish in this whole situation when he had the upper hand until they ended up doing that.
Emily, one reason why this story has got so much attention in Britain is because in the messages, J.D. Vance talked about Europe freeloading of American defense. Now, he has a point here, because I looked into it, and it turns out that actually a proportionally very small amount of U.S. cargo traffic goes through the Red Sea. So when America attacks the Houthis, it's really acting in defense of European and Chinese trade, not American trade. On the other hand, we keep hearing that people in the administration just kind of hate Europe and think we're welfare queens or something. Is this genuinely what the conservative establishment thinks of Europe, and does it feel differently about Britain?
Absolutely feels differently about Britain.
Good.
It isn't to say there isn't some conflation. Sometimes, just like these are people with funny accents who were mean to us during the Iraq War. There's some, there's definitely, like, listen, I grew up in the middle of the country, not around like New York or DC, and people have long memories, and people were sort of offended by, some of the, like some people were offended by like Borat, not to say that there weren't people in the United States doing that kind of thing, but there's residue and there's significant residual, I think, cultural resentment over some of those things. So I think that's where you see J.D. Vance even kind of blowing up at Zelensky. It comes from that well. It comes from something deeper than just the policy questions sometimes. Britain has definitely seen differently. I think even Keir Starmer understands that and has dealt with that in a very particular way that, again, is very different from how, say, Justin Trudeau, who's even closer to the United States, handled it. So I think there's acknowledgement of that. But on the other hand, Europe in general doesn't carry a lot of goodwill, not just with the Trump administration, but with the American people. And the American people sort of have this, I would say, center-right people in America, Republican voters, types of people in the heartland do have this sort of residual resentment for sending so much money, and sometimes disproportionately, to aid Europe's defense when they feel like they get mocked or censored even by European elites. So it's a tough, there's a deep well, I think, of cultural resentment, but rationality wins out in the policy front sometimes.
Interesting, a sort of economic punishment for cultural snobbery, in a way. Luckily, we've got the Royals to kind of bring him back on board. Is what we're discovering.
You might have to take the American Royals back to really
I don't know. That
divide.
really could lead to arms.
Yeah, no, we might
That's a trade war.
We may have to impose a tariff. If you're going to export Harry and Meghan to us, we're going to charge you 25% on that.
On preserves and other jams.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we'd be willing to pay that.
That is really fascinating. I mean, we've had the Chancellor out this morning, who obviously had her spring statement yesterday, completely kiboshed by the President's tariff announcement. And her claim is that tariffs aren't just bad for the UK, they're bad for the US as well. Mm-hmm. Is there actually a sense of that within the US, is there a kind of chest beating joy at the moment about Liberation Day next Tuesday? Or, aside from car manufacturers, presumably, are people feeling very anxious about potential trade wars or continuing rising inflation in the US?
Almost nobody is as supportive of these tariffs as Donald Trump's inner circle. Most economists in the U.S. are really nervous about it. Donald Trump sees that, again, as a good thing because he would say their expertise has failed the American people over the course of decades. So the best thing is to be going against what they say is right. But even in conservative circles, there's anxiety about how these tariffs are going to play out. And actually, to the point that we were talking about earlier, because they're being used both as a genuine ideological economic wall, but also because they're being used as a negotiating tactic in all kinds of different ways. So that means you really don't know where they end. That sort of takes away the predictability of a limiting principle. And so I think there's intense nervousness that these tariffs, if they do go into effect for a long time at really, really high levels, actually damage the Trump administration. People look to the Reagan administration and say there was a economic downturn early in the Reagan administration. He still maintained a lot of popularity. I think some of the older Republicans right now are comforting themselves with that history and just hoping that whatever economic pain is to come in the next few months, which there likely will be some, even Scott Bessent has acknowledged that, is temporary and will turn around in a way that the American people appreciate eventually. But the nervousness is that they don't know. It's much less predictable when it's also being used not just as an economic ideological protectionist measure, but also as a negotiating strategy over things like Ukraine or things like fentanyl and border crossings, like legitimate points of negotiation. But if it's sort of interpersonal state leader versus state leader tariff violence, then it's much less predictable, which is harder for the markets to absorb and harder, honestly, for companies who are trying to figure out whether to onshore, to nearshore, to make certain decisions.
Emily Jashinsky, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Cleo, you worked in Number 10. Mm-hmm. To what extent now is Britain governed by WhatsApp?
Gosh, that is a good question. Not least because, of course, it was the Telegraph that released Matt Hancock's WhatsApps during COVID in the COVID files, which sent shivers down the spine of every single MP at the time.
Right. Because in the old days, people communicated through one-on-one communication or memo. But now, WhatsApp and Signal means you both talk more frequently, more openly, and there's greater risk, it seems to me, of exposure, of it falling into the wrong hands or...
Yeah, so, during COVID, one of the reasons that I would say WhatsApp and Signal sort of overtook conventional meetings is because you couldn't have everybody in the same room. Right. And we were just moving so quickly. It was the equivalent of sort of building a jumbo jet on the runway. We were just reacting so fast to events, and you had people all over the place working from home and so forth. In my experience, I wouldn't say decisions get made on these platforms, but a lot of discussion around them happens. And actually, I've been out of government a few years now, but they're obviously still prevalent. I thought the remarkable thing about this Signal leak, for me, is that if this were a novel idea, making these kinds of decisions and having these discussions on Signal, someone would have thought, oh my gosh, a new group have been put on. Let me just check who's on here. Who's that? Yeah. Jeffrey Goldberg. That's a mistake. But it's obviously so everyday for them. They just think, if you're Susie Wiles, you just think, oh God, not another bloody group. Here I am. Oh yeah, okay, we're just going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. And it's, what was it called? Yemen Small Group. This is obviously happening all the time. Yeah. And the big question that will be happening in the UK government at the moment is, let's just everybody do a bit of spring cleaning of the groups that you're on and just double check what you're part of. And Signal is a very, very safe platform to be doing these kinds of activities on. It's heavily encrypted. It has auto-delete functions, which was not a typical WhatsApp feature. And I noticed post the Matt Hancock WhatsApps, suddenly every politician had an auto-delete function on their
You're right.
WhatsApp.
Yes, I've noticed that too.
It's a kind of major panic. It must have been agonising for Matt to see all these WhatsApps out there.
And if you're a journalist, you know you're special if you're talking to a politician and it doesn't have auto-delete.
Yes, I think that's true. Yeah, very, very special. But I actually think the debate here is there is a question about whether government by WhatsApp via Signal is a good thing or not. And if you look at the people on that list, Marco Rubio, Susie Wiles, J.D. Vance, how often can they get all those people into a room together to thrash this stuff out? This is actually quite a good use of their time to have them able to, speak to each other at the touch of a button. The closest scandal that you can actually tie this to in the UK, I think, is the times when ministers have accidentally forwarded emails to the wrong people. So a perfect example is Suella Braverman having to resign as Home Secretary when she forwarded sensitive information to basically the wrong person on email. She just got the email address wrong. And I mean, we've all done it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's also this fuss about you mustn't mix private and professional email. People do that all the time.
Totally. And private and personal devices as well.
I think part of what shocks people is, if you read the Signal chats, is it's this strange mixture of, it obviously was war plans. The administration keeps denying that it was. But if you read it, it's things like the planes fly at 1 p.m. and casual chat, like J.D. Vance saying, I'm sick of the Europeans leeching off us. But that's what WhatsApps look like. And if that's the way... You mentioned similar scandals in this country. The one it put me in mind of is Watergate, when Richard Nixon, for his own use, bugged the White House. And as a result, we now have a really good, useful historical record of how politicians speak to each other in private. And it's exactly the same as what you see in the Signal chats. It's a combination of official administration business, some of which can be quite scary sounding, the bombs are flying, with just chat, talking smack about other people, being really rude, swearing, because that's how people talk.
But this slightly goes back to our conversation with Emily, because initially Nixon was able to harness the Watergate scandal really cleverly. So for the first re-election, he won by a landslide because the Democrats started talking about Watergate. And he said, they're all mad conspiracy theorists. Here I am in China, in Russia, doing major work on the world stage. And these kind of nut jobs on the left are talking about people bugging people. That sounds so weird. It sounds something out of a novel. And actually loads of voters thought, yeah, he's right. And the Democrats thought, something has happened here. We're going to double down. We're just going to talk about Watergate. And then it wasn't actually until his second term that actually the truth came out, and it was as bad as a novel. Yeah. So some of what Emily was saying earlier about how Trump's ability to double down on these things and now paint the Atlantic as, spinning this story out and the editor being a sleazebag and all the rest of it. It is kind of that a perfect parallel to Watergate in that sense. Like, can they actually angle this to work for them?
Well, coming up next, Kamal has been speaking to Kemi Badenoch about Trump's tariffs, the Signal fiasco, and net zero.
So Kemi Badenoch, a little bit different from the last time we met. We're in the beautiful Mediterranean biome at Anthropy here in Cornwall. We're here for this Anthropy event at the Eden Project. It is all about the future of the planet, but not just the future of the planet in terms of climate, but the future of good society. This may not be seen by many as your natural habitat. Why did you come down from London after the very important spring statement, which we'll get on to, come down to Cornwall? Why was this important enough for you to come down?
Because we need to start spreading the message about what the Conservative Party is again. A lot of people have forgotten or just associate it with the last few years we had in government. We're a party with a 200-year history. And one of the fundamental principles we have is about conserving the very best of our society for the next generation, creating a legacy for them. And I think that this is one of the big things that's gone wrong, that all of us alive now are enjoying the sacrifices that previous generations had made to give us a better life. But we're not making the right sacrifices for the next generation. We're too invested in the here and now, not just tomorrow. Whether that's in terms of the environment, how are we delivering a better environment? You would have heard my speech last week. I don't think we're doing it with net zero. I don't think the plan is working. We need to make sure that we're not bankrupting the country. But how are we doing it in terms of the economy? You heard that spring statement yesterday. You've seen the news today, this morning, tariffs, steel plant closures. Things are not working. How are we going to get back on track? And a lot of the people here are business people. I believe that it's business that delivers growth. We've made business too hard in this country. Entrepreneurs are leaving. Dynamic young people are leaving to go elsewhere. How can we be more competitive? Let's talk about that.
A lot of people argue that the reason that we have struggled so much with our economy is because of the size of the state. The government at the moment, government spending is nearly 45% of all of our gross domestic product. Very similar levels to the levels we had during COVID. You've spoken already about a smaller, smarter state. I wrote on Monday in the Telegraph about we need to return to austerity. Is that do we not need to return to the idea that the state must be smaller and it must do things differently?
We need to live within our means. And the thing about phrases like austerity is that they are loaded terms that don't necessarily mean what people... Yes, indeed, but by the left. I mean, if you look at the so-called period of austerity under George Osborne, for example, actually a lot more money was spent on the state. So we need to... It's just that it was reprofiled. So we need to be very clear and honest about what exactly is going on. Do I think that there is too much government? Yes. Is the state too big? Yes. Are we living beyond our means? Yes. We are spending more on debt interests, on the interest we pay on the debt than we do on education, on defense. We've got to change. And what's worrying about the economic situation is that because of the decisions that the government is making, it's becoming more expensive. It's becoming more expensive to pay that debt. So something which was affordable a year or 2 years ago has become unaffordable with nothing else changing other than interest rates on the borrowing. That's not sustainable. And that makes life harder for all the families out there because they end up paying the price in lower wages, higher taxes, higher prices. That's what's causing all these problems.
A cup of tears have arrived for you.
Oh, thank you.
Kemi, which is very, very good. You were questioned at the event you spoke at a little earlier today about this net zero, about the net zero issues that you have raised. You've said the 2050 target that has been put in legislation for us to hit on net zero is impossible to hit. A lot of people here will disagree with you,
yes.
But today we've had the news that the Chinese company that owns the Scunthorpe blast furnaces, the steel mills there, is now looking at closing down that plant. Given that a lot of the public believe that we need to take action on climate change and think there needs to be a target of 2050, coming here, you knew you were going to get a bit of a rough ride maybe from the audience. What did you want to say to them?
Well, I'm here to speak the truth. I'm not just here to tell people nice things. And hitting that target with the plan that we've got in place is impossible. And if the only way you will do it is by closing down steel plants, like the one in Scunthorpe. Port Talbot, for example, we turned into an electric arc furnace. Port Talbot was the biggest carbon emitter. And if you had a net zero plan, that meant that we can't have something like that pumping out all that carbon. So we changed it to an electric arc furnace. So at least we still had steel making capacity. It's viable, but it's greener. But there are costs to that. There are costs when it comes to jobs, to regenerating it. Hopefully that will deliver a better part of South Wales. But there are also costs in terms of what kind of steel we can produce. It's not steel that we can use for defense. It's very specific. So we limit our ability to respond to things. We become slightly less resilient. And it's all very well saying that we've got a target to hit net zero by 2050. Many of the people making these decisions aren't going to be around in 2050. I hope to be around. I'll be 70 in 2050, and I want to be, in my old age, I want to be in a situation where I'm still living in a wealthy country there's something for my children, ideally my grandchildren. How do we go about delivering that? And that means looking at whether the plan we've got now is working, and it's not.
You sat through the spring statement yesterday. If you put yourself in the shoes of the Chancellor, what do you think she's going to need to do in the next budget? Is she going to need to raise taxes, raise borrowing, and cut the state back? Because her sums, many economists are arguing, simply do not add up.
Her sums do not add up. That is right. And it is because she was naive about the scale of the problem that she was creating when she rushed in October and delivered a budget where the first priority was, paying lots of people in the public sector more money. They gave train drivers, lots of money, and they congratulated themselves on sorting all those things out. And then they taxed the people who create the money. They tax businesses, farmers. Small business is what drives this country. It's not big business. Most people in this country work for small business. Made it more expensive to hire young people. And now they're surprised that all the numbers are going in the wrong direction. So the spring statement yesterday was really an emergency budget to try and fix that. But her decisions have made borrowing more expensive. So all of the debt that we had, which we were paying, at lower interest rates, that's changing. And they keep complaining about what happened under the Conservatives. The rates that we're paying now are much higher than what was under us. She needs to own that. So she's going to have some very tough decisions to make. And I don't envy her, because obviously she's from a left-wing party where they just believe in spend, spend, spend. They don't know where the money comes from. I think she's going to have a lot of issues with her party. The welfare reforms, which we thought were going to be significant, have turned out not to be so. The OBR has scored them less well than they were expecting. And I don't think she's got much room for maneuver. If she really wants to fix the economy, she needs to make life easier for business. It is not government that creates growth, it's business. And they see business as a problem, not as a solution.
Do you think taxes will have to rise in October if she stays on the same course?
Well, I don't think taxes should be rising any further, because you might be solving a problem for this afternoon, but you're creating a bigger problem for tomorrow. Tax rises now are not the solution. We need to find a way to get people delivering more productivity, creating more wealth. Tax rises will not do that.
Every day we have to, of course, respond to Donald Trump and what the latest thing to have come out of the White House. The announcement overnight of 25% tariffs on car imports into America will affect the United Kingdom. We've just been reading together just before we started recording this podcast about the Scunthorpe closure of the possible closure of the blast furnaces there. They talk about tariffs. Do you support Donald Trump's tariff policy?
It's economic nationalism. I think that for us as the UK, a trading country, we're an island, we have to trade. Tariffs are not good for us. So I can't support tariffs in that circumstances. I think I understand the thinking behind it, but this sort of thing will start trade wars. I used to be trade secretary. I was trade secretary for this country for 2 years, and everything I did was about trying to lower tariffs, make it easier for our business people to sell their products around the world. That is how we make money. It's good for the balance of payments. We don't want to be in a trade deficit all the time. We want to be making things that people around the world can buy and selling our services. Tariffs make that very, very difficult. The way to solve this now is to get a UK-US trade deal, or some kind of deal where we negotiate intensively with the US and show that we are allied countries. What's bad for us ends up being bad for them as well in the long term. And hopefully let's come to a reasonable consensus on on a way forward. That's what the government needs to spend time on now.
One of the things that's being discussed is that we should stop the digital services tax, which will increase taxes on particularly US tech firms as part of this deal. Do you think that we should stop the digital services tax?
Well, let's have a look at it in the round. Trade deals are never, one thing for something else. It's not specifically tit for tat. There are lots of things that will come into it. There will be, services deals. You're talking about the digital services tax. There will be things on food and farming. They'll probably want us to deregulate. We will want lots of stuff on financial services. So just picking one little tax or one specific tax, I don't think it is little, one specific tax and thinking, if we do this, everything will be fine. That's not how trade deals work. The last big trade deal that we did was was CPTPP. We had 13 countries that we were negotiating with, and it's very complex. There are lots of moving parts. What they do with Canada, for instance, who we are in a trade deal with in Mexico, they're in CPTPP, will have an impact. So anyone who's coming out and saying, oh, if we just lift this little thing, it'll be fine, is not serious. The US is our single biggest recipient of UK cars. We make about £8 billion from exports. Rachel Reeves is going to be in a lot of trouble if those tariffs hold. Let's hope this is one of those things that Donald Trump changes his mind on. He does change his mind frequently, but if he doesn't, that means that she's not getting taxes from those companies. That's going to be another problem. Many of them may not be able to survive. So, this is very bad for the Chancellor, and it'll be very bad for the country if it holds.
But just to be clear, the digital services tax should be in the mix, but it's not the only thing. Is that your
that
feeling? Just to make sure I'm clear.
A trade deal is always about negotiating a plethora of issues. I can't remember specifically what the digital services tax is. I don't like taxes generally. I like us to trade freely. So without looking at the background into it, if it's something that is up for debate, it should be part of a bigger package with a UK-US trade deal.
Just a final question on this intelligence leak, the signal leak, which brought in the Atlantic journalists. Do you feel that we are secure sharing intelligence in the same way with America, where they can't have secure conversations without accidentally inviting journalists into those conversations?
I think that we should look at that incident as an exception, not the rule. There is no country that knows more about security than the US. We have significant intelligence collaboration with them. We couldn't do our intelligence work without them. They need us to. Deals like partnerships like AUKUS, for example. I don't think that the WhatsApps or the signals that politicians are sending are reflective of the security environment that we're operating in.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea. I think quite unusual for Kemi Badenoch to come to somewhere like the Eden Project and Anthropy. Most people here, we can hear some of the background noise of lots and lots of events, lots and lots of discussions. Most people here will really back the net zero target for 2050. It shows a degree of bravery from Kemi Badenoch to come here and have the discussion about businesses need to flourish, and the only way to get a better society is to actually allow for more profit making and more job creation. So I think that's an interesting choice that she has made, and very good point made by John O'Brien, who's a founder of Anthropy. He said that some people, he didn't say any parties, but let's not forget that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer do go to Davos. He said that some politicians have time to go to Davos in the Swiss Alps, but don't have time to come here to Cornwall. And I thought that was a point well made. The fact that there are no Labour government representatives here, but the leader of the opposition has made it here, and there are a number of shadow cabinet ministers and other Conservative MPs here as well. She was quite strong on Donald Trump and trade. She doesn't agree with the journey that the President of the United States is on, that there could be a risk of a trade war. But given what has happened with tariffs, she says that she can understand why economic nationalism can seem attractive, but that Britain has to think very clearly about how it responds to America. And she suggested via this free trade deal, this narrow deal between the UK and the US. One place she wouldn't go was being in any way critical about intelligence sharing after the remarkable Signal chat, the messaging group Signal chat, where Pete Hegseth, JD Vance were talking about an attack on Yemen, the Houthi rebels there, and they'd invited accidentally the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg, into that chat. But she was very careful to say, this is an exception, our intelligence relationship is deep and really important, and she was very careful not to say anything critical on that issue. So, surprising for Kemi to come down, but I think for her, an interesting choice and probably a positive one.
Cleo, you worked in Number 10 under Boris, so how do you think Kemi's doing?
I mean, Kemi's got the problem of being leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
Where, particularly in matters of kind of foreign affairs and big economic affairs, no one really cares what you have to say, and it's really hard to make enough noise. And she in particular, I think, is struggling to be a bit of a weather maker because Nigel Farage absorbs so much of the kind of media interest. And of course, he's got this huge event tomorrow, which Kamal and Camilla will be at, launching his local elections campaign.
In Birmingham, smelly Birmingham.
In smelly Birmingham. I think...
We're saying that not because Birmingham's generally smelly, but because they've got a bin strike going on.
Yes,
at the moment,
a poor rats for reform in Birmingham. Kemi's main difficulty, I think, is that she's struggling to stay on topic. She shouldn't be talking about the signal leak. She shouldn't be talking to Kamal about tariffs even. She should be attacking Rachel Reeves' spring statement from yesterday. She should be, maximising that opportunity, and she's allowed that to get away from her. I know she's talking a bit about net zero in Scunthorpe, but it sounds so far removed from the very specific issues she could talk about in the next 6 weeks, which are potholes and bin collections.
And she's talking about Scunthorpe from the Eden Project in Cornwall.
Which is like the most middle-class place in the world to be saying, like, oh, don't worry, people of working-class Scunthorpe, I hear you.
It's a very Kemi location because she's all about big intellectual ideas. She's always talking in generalities, her theory of government and all this sort of stuff. I think she should be doing smaller jabs and attacking policy rather than this big blue sky thinking stuff that she does all the time.
Yeah, and I actually don't know what her particular policy ideas or indeed objections are. I don't think she's done a great job of setting that out yet. And it's actually Robert Jenrick who's doing better than her, who goes out on the airwaves. You and I were discussing this earlier about, he goes out on the airwaves and says, this is what I would do on very specific, quite micro policy points.
I think it's very funny. He lost the leadership election and he decided just to ignore the result and act as though he were the leader.
He's probably happier for it. He's probably happier for it because it's a tough time to be leader of the opposition when a Labour Party Prime Minister is acting in quite a conservative way.
You worked for a man who, even if he was in opposition, even when he was unemployed, people still wanted to talk about Boris. Is this just the problem of we had this one unique, incredibly charismatic person, and it's difficult for anyone to measure up to that in public life?
The two teams have different problems. Our difficulty was trying to get a bridle on the guy. and Kemi's team is actually, their problem is trying to kind of get her out there a bit more. Yeah. So she's always been really strong on her rhetoric against woke and gender ideology. But I would largely say some of that ship has sailed and she's struggling to find purchase on a new kind of issue of her own that isn't nebulous and isn't human rights law. She's got to find 3 to 5 kind of key issues, not write them down on a stone, and show that she can kind of solve them. And I think get a clearer communication style, because the thing about Boris is, aside from his kind of blustery, Latin phrased way of speaking, he's actually very direct and clear, and it's easy to, he's entertaining. It's easy to follow what he's saying, and I think that needs a bit of thinking about.
One journalist said to me that the hardest part about covering Kemi is trying to explain to the readers what she's just said.
It's people always say, now let me be absolutely clear, and then they follow it with a word salad. And I think that's her, I'm afraid. So she's got this local election campaign to cut her teeth after the leadership contest on a kind of proper electoral test, and it'll be really interesting to see how well she does. My instinct is that Reform and actually the Lib Dems will come out of this with the most to shout about. And it'll be interesting to see by May where her parliamentary party and where Conservative Party members sit on their confidence in her leadership. And it may be that Robert Jenrick will be making a move soon. Who could possibly say?